Hi everyone. In this video update, I just want to highlight a few things on some of the most recent assignments that you've completed for me. Everyone did a really great job on the understanding sources assignment. You were all able to determine accurately which link fit with which type of source, and you gave really good characteristics that helped you make that determination. I just want to highlight a couple of quick brief things about that. So reference, popular, and scholarly sources were the three types of sources you were asked to determine the differences between. You know, the names themselves kind of give away what's the central aspect of these sources. You weren't asked to identify a trade source here, and so I just want to talk briefly about that. You can use all the same kinds of characteristics that you use to determine differences between these sources as you can for thinking about the differences between trade and scholarly sources. But this is a little bit more important because if you're using the library databases, even if you click on the little box that says limit your search to just scholarly sources, trade sources oftentimes will come up. So you can't only rely on that to determine whether a source will work for you or not. So the biggest difference between trade and scholarly sources is that trade sources are primarily written for practitioners, people working in a field, where scholarly sources are written for other scholars. They're written for other researchers in that area. And usually the way you know that this is the case is that most scholarly sources that you find, journal articles that you find, are going to be primary sources, meaning that the authors have collected their own data or constructed their own original argument utilizing evidence. They'll talk about the methods that they use to collect that data. They'll talk about the theoretical constructs that are informing their critical argument, and they will talk about how they've analyzed that data. A trade article might reference certain studies. It might talk about how the results of studies fit in with their topic, but they rarely have collected their own data, so they're not going to have that kind of explicit conversation. This really matters because when you think about a literature review, which is the kind of paper you're going to be asked to write for me in this class, and it is an important piece of all research papers that you would conduct in future research classes, that part of the paper is where you're going to be examining or providing an overview of that scholarly conversation. And so you're really looking for sources that are engaging in that kind of scholarship and research work. So everyone accurately recognized this source as a popular source, utilizing good information like the source, who it's written for, the purpose of the article itself to determine that difference. So the question is, would you use it in a research paper? And I think the answer is yes, but only in certain places. So a source like this could be really great as a starting point to an investigation. It could help you see connections to current issues or, the significance of the topic. It might spark a new idea for you. It might even reference some other kinds of scholarly articles that you could then follow up and find, as this article did. And so for those reasons, you might utilize it in, say, the introduction to a research paper or even in the discussion section. But where you wouldn't use it would be in the literature review because it's not primary. So while the authors of this article do reference past studies, they don't go into specific detail of these studies. They don't talk about what methods were used or how the data was analyzed. They didn't actually conduct the research themselves. And the article is not subject to the same in-depth peer review process that a scholarly article would be subject to. And so I might use this paper in, an introduction to give some sense of the significance of a topic, but I would not cite it in a literature review. I would cite a scholarly article in a literature review. And most of you were able to correctly identify the second source as scholarly, identifying a lot of important characteristics that allowed you to make that identification. And key here is that this is also primary work. The authors conducted their own study. collected their own data or created their own original argument. They provide details about the methods and theories used. And in this way, they are adding to that larger scholarly conversation. And so it would be a really great source to use within a literature review. Wikipedia, of course, is a reference resource, as all of you accurately described. And reference resources are really good. Even Wikipedia is really good and plays a particular role in the research process. But would you cite it in a paper? Well, if you're ever directly quoting something, you should always cite it. That avoids plagiarism. But probably a better way to use a source like this is if there's information that's raised that you think is important to integrate into, say, the introduction of a research paper to provide background or contextual information, then you probably want to try to find another source that backs that up that you could use and cite in that area. It also can, point your attention to other kinds of citations that you might want to use. But it's important to note that it's, of course, not primary source. Wikipedia isn't, but all reference resources are not. So the Credo articles that you found in your assignment for this week that are probably really useful in providing some background information, while they're written by scholars, they are not primary research. They're still just giving you broad overviews and contextual information. So you wouldn't cite those in a literature review, even though those would be high quality sources to, say, bring into an introduction or a discussion. I want to draw your attention a little bit to the material quiz this week. People did a great job on this, but there was one question that a number of people seem to miss and that I want to make sure you understand. Interlibrary loan. This is a service that is provided to you as students through the use of BSU Library. And it's a super useful service. What it means is that you can get a copy of almost any article that you want, whether our library owns it or not. So if you're on Google Scholar and you're looking for sources and you find a citation for an article that you think will be really great, and you go and try to find it in our library and you can't access it, you can simply put the information into Interlibrary Loan, and they will send a copy of this straight to your inbox, straight to your email. It sometimes takes a few days, at the most up to a week, but it's a super great service, so I encourage all of you to check that out on our library website. Finally, I just want to talk briefly to you about the scavenger hunt assignment. There were some really great suggestions that people made on how to find information. And one of the things you might know overall is there's lots of ways to access information. There's not one right way. There's a number of different paths that you could take. However, there are some tips and tricks that you could use to make your search for specific information faster, quicker, and more accurate. So I want to highlight a couple of those. The first two scenarios that you were provided with both ask you to find statistical information on a topic that you might be interested in. So one option, I could just go to Google and type in some keywords, and that could work. Many people were able to find reliable and accurate popular press sources in doing a search that way. The problem, of course, is I might have to skim through quite a few pages actually to find the best statistical information that I can using that method. Another option is I could go straight to a resource that I know and trust. For instance, Pew Research Center does a lot of really great studies. I could go there, put the topic in that I'm interested in, and see if they have any research on this. Again, they might, but it's still a little bit of an open-ended search. Probably the best way to find the information I'm looking for, highly reliable statistical information, would be to go more directly to the source of that kind of information. So the government is in the business of collecting statistics, and oftentimes will have really great research, statistical research on topics that you might be interested in. So if I go to Google and I put in cite:.gov, what that does is tell Google only search for sources that are coming from .gov websites. And so I know rather than getting a whole bunch of pages of somewhat useful, somewhat less useful websites and sources. Almost everything that comes up is very specific, and I can feel quite comfortable with where it's coming from. So it just gives you a few little quick ways to locate information that you want to find in a much more direct and specific fashion. So the Google Sheet that you were asked to read gives you a number of these tips, and I highly recommend, if you didn't already, to pay attention to that. There were some great suggestions for how you would find scholarly sources on a research topic. You can certainly use Google Scholar for this, but again, as with the last example, you might be sifting through a lot more information. It's a much bigger database. It's going to be looking through a lot more resources, so it's going to put more of the work on your shoulders to finding what is specific. My recommendation is always in this case to go to BSU Library first. Start small first and then extend to larger areas if you need to. And I'd also make the recommendation that you should always start with databases that are specific to the discipline that you're looking for information in. So while it is a really useful idea and a smart choice to look to, say, a music database if you are doing research in the genre of music, that I would always suggest would be sort of the second step. You're more likely to find research that is specific to the field of communication studies if you start with a communication studies database. And there I would always say Mass Media and Complete is the best database to go with. For this scenario, you were asked to find very specifically what was Pepsi's official response, to this situation. So there are some issues here if you just go to Google and type in some keywords. Many people mentioned that they got things like articles from the New York Times. And those might give you some information, and they could be useful to an overarching understanding of the situation. But they're only going to be ever reports on what Pepsi said. They're not a primary source telling you specifically what Pepsi said. So in these situations where you're looking for a very specific information, go to the source. Go to Pepsi's website. Most likely you're able to look through and find, say, their press releases, and you could know exactly what their response was to this situation. Similarly, if you already know the source that you want to find, you have the citation information. Certainly, and many of you were able to find this if you go to Google or Google Scholar and you, say, put in the title of the article, it's possible that it will come up. It's even possible that you'll be able to access it straight from Google. But you also might end up spending a few, 15 to 20 minutes looking through sources to try to find the exact one that you're looking for. If you go straight to the library and you go to journal title A through Z, you can plug in the journal title, Communication Studies, identify the year of publication, pick the volume and the issue, and it'll take you straight to the specific article that you are looking for. The other thing it's likely to give you is a link to all of the references cited in this article. So that's a great way to build more scholarly articles if you're trying to find a number of these to use in a paper. It will also have a link to all of the articles that cited this article in the database. So not only can you locate this quite quickly within a minute or two, you also might find access to a whole bunch of other sources that will be really useful to you in a larger research project. Lastly, people correctly identified that what you're looking for here is reference information. And so one place to go is, of course, a reference site. Dictionary.com is one reference site. Wikipedia can be another. But I would also encourage you to think about looking for reference sites that are more educational focused or focused on a particular disciplinary area. Because you're dealing with academic topics here, you might want to find reference resources written by scholars and that are more academic in tone.